Hey guys, so the topic today I want to talk about is my white privilege. Now, let me start this by saying that God loves every race and He made variety because He wants people to be different. So we can rejoice in what we are and what our friends are and what other people are. That's all fine and dandy. Let me tell you about my experience though. In elementary school in my hometown, minorities were perhaps more likely to be teased. Nowadays, that would be a hate crime. But if you were harassed simply for being white these days, good luck getting justice in Canada. I was bullied in middle school. If I were a minority, that would have been less acceptable in that environment. In grade 9, it got pretty bad. In high school, I experienced anti-white racism, but I was okay with it because I was easygoing about it, and there were a lot of different colors and races there, and I just sort of went along with it. I think how we react to racism is important because it affects our relationships in the ethnic communities. I wasn't given any scholarships for my identity, but I was given a grant in scholarship for excellence. May I ask you this question? Would you rather be rewarded for your identity or for hard work? Maybe think about that one a little bit. I ended up getting most of my post-secondary education through a private American university because government-run institutions in Alberta are largely anti-white, not to mention anti-male and anti-Christian. At least that's been my experience with the recruitment and also just watching how they run their institutions. You look at their policies, you look at the educators, you look at the papers they produce. It just seems that way. Immigration also makes it a very competitive atmosphere, and you're competing with large countries that often send their very best. So you look at Canada, there's not a lot of people in Canada. Even Vietnam is more populated than Canada. And China sends, tons of their very best students to Canada. And so it's difficult to compete with them because they're very good at what they do. I went to work overseas primarily because of all the outsourcing being done in Canada and the US in my field, which was IT at the time. I suppose I'm perpetuating the outsourcing problem by preparing Asians for globalization. Immigration also makes it a very, complicated world, but I'm okay with that. So I emigrated. I switched my field to English instruction and enjoyed empowering Asians to succeed in the global economy. Now, I've been mistreated in Asia for being a foreigner, but I've also had special treatment as well. It's a mixed bag. In Canada, being white seems to be a liability more than anything, as it's harder to get a job if you're not a visible minority or belong to some special rights group, or have some kind of disability that makes you stand out. Most places hiring are woke these days and will fire white males, particularly straight Christian white single males, for spurious reasons, simply because they want to punish white people, Christians, men, and heterosexuals for even existing. Asia is a much more accepting environment for white people on the whole than Canada is. You can fit in. It's acceptable to discriminate against whites with no repercussions in the West. I would say that there is less racism here than there is in the West. Living in both in Korea and Vietnam, I adopted the cultures, the food, the lifestyles, and some of the language, and I must say I enjoy it. You compare this to some of the trash that the mainstream media puts out that's anti-white propaganda and some of the stuff you hear in the Twitter dumpster fire, it's just terrible. And it's embarrassing, like New York Times and Washington Post and all that. The kind of stuff that I hear is just so racist against white people. And in this modern age, I guess it's acceptable. It's cool to be anti-white. So I enjoy living in Asia rather than my own country because I can be accepted. As Christians, though, we will always be outcasts. John 15:19 says, "If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." We are sojourners of this earth. God is preparing a place for all Christians to enjoy eternally in heaven, where we will all be united and there will be no more division by race or ethnicity or culture. We will all be privileged. I can't speak for other skin colors or ethnicities because I don't share their experience, but I do know that every race enjoys some degrees of privilege. And a lot of times it depends on where you're living. So maybe in America, Asians might get discriminated against to a degree, but in Asia, Americans might get discriminated to a degree. So it works both ways. We shouldn't put barriers between each other because of skin, race, or ethnicity, but we should love each other and each and every person for who they are and for their specific culture, their specific individuality. Another example that ties into this is just the whole racial borrowing that we see in culture. I think that's acceptable, but I know that some people say that's very offensive. But I know in Asia, that's very common for Asians to adopt parts of Western culture and use it as their own. And I have nothing against that. And I also adopt Asian culture as well. And I think that that's great. Some people would say that's cultural misappropriation, but I say that is culturalization or globalization or intermingling, cross-culture connection. It's good, it's healthy. So I think we have to stop being so isolated and so, polarized about everything and say, I'm white, you're black, I'm this, you're that, I'm male, you're female, whatever. Let's talk about the similarities we have instead of the differences. Because there are people out there that are using race to divide politically, and they see us as pawns. And if they can get all the white people against the black people and all the black people against the white people, then there can be some major strife and a political upheaval in America and across Western nations. And then they can lay down the social control that they want to have. And that's not cool. And in that situation, all races will suffer. So we don't want that. So instead of demanding justice for being discriminated against ourselves, let's set an example of how we ought to be treated by loving our neighbor as ourselves first. Instead of pushing and hurting others to get our own way, let's reach out to the oppressed and the needy and fight for their cause, but do it in a peaceful way that society can accept without resulting to some kind of race war. I want all people to know Christ. I want you to know Christ. And I want everyone, even my worst enemy, to go to heaven, because hell is such a terrible place. No love, no happiness, no light, just eternal suffering, torment, burning, and darkness, and sadness, and from what I've heard, ever escalating torment. I couldn't wish that existence on anyone. Satan wants people to be racially divided. He wants people to be claiming, oh, you have a privilege and I don't, and have them fight with each other. Of course, we all have different privileges. I'm white, but I'm not wealthy, and I don't have the privilege of living in a super nice neighborhood, so I suffer the difficulties, especially living in the country I do live in, where it's developing. There are a lot of challenges living here, and it affects my health. It's given me long-term health problems, but I've accepted it, and I'm dealing with it. And God's given me a chance to go through with it, and not to overcome it completely, but just to live with it. So if you want to fight racial injustice, be willing to lower yourself, lower your standard of living, and reach out to other people, maybe hang out with people that you wouldn't normally because you wouldn't want to associate with them for whatever reason. You're different than them, different racial group, different ethnicity, different color, different interest, and bear their burdens, love them, help them in their suffering. You could educate them, you could give money to their cause. Whatever is necessary to bring some unity in the world. I think that's what we need right now is unity. So let's look at a way to respect all people. Remember, human lives matter. Black lives matter, white lives matter, every life, every race, Asian lives matter. Everyone out there matters. And we're all suffering right now through this COVID crisis. We're all suffering because of the economy. We're all suffering because of wars and trade wars and inequality. And I think we all need to work on this issue of discrimination together. Let's work towards a solution together. Peace out, guys.